the cloud. Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to the BALI Speaker Forum. Today we have Claire Petersky. She's going to be discussing homelessness and housing. She has been a member with BALI since 1999, and she's worked on and off with the Washington State Housing Finance Commission since 1990. Her time's not working for the commission. She was at the United Way of King County, Imagine Housing, and the director of both Eastside Friends of Seniors and Wallingford Community Senior Center, as well as other area nonprofits. So tonight she's gonna kind of talk about the Washington State Housing Finance Commission, what they are, and what we can be doing about our area's affordability crisis. So thank you so much, Claire, for joining us tonight. I'm gonna make you the host now.
Then you let me know when I'm hosting.
Okay. Make host. Yes.
So let's see here. Can I share a screen? Look at this. I can share a screen. So let me just pop this into from the beginning. There we go. Look at that. Wow. So you get this picture here is from when I was just a few years younger and more beautiful. I'm Claire Petersky. I'm a manager at the Washington State Housing Finance Commission in the Multifamily Housing and Community Facilities Division. Although I will be speaking from my experience, both the commission, as was mentioned over the years, and also working with various area nonprofits. When I give opinions, and I will have a few in this presentation, along with facts, I'm not speaking on behalf of the Washington State Housing Finance Commission for this presentation. All opinions are mine. Okay, so now that I've done my disclaimer and introduced who I am from a professional viewpoint, I'm going to just launch right into this. And what this is going to be about, a little bit about homelessness, a little bit more about affordable housing, just kind of give you an idea. This is mostly a Seattle perspective, a little bit more of a King County perspective, and then ever so slightly a statewide perspective. If you're down in New Mexico, the national perspective here is going to be razor thin. You know, it's going to be, it gets more, it's going to be as specific as possible because this is a fairly big topic, right? So that's what this is going to be about. And let's see here if I can actually get to the next slide. Look at this. Yes, I got to the next slide. So I think I know how to work this. It is not a surprise, I'm sure, to anybody on this presentation that affordability, housing affordability, is a huge problem in the Seattle area and for Washington State as a whole. Housing prices in the Seattle area rose more than 26% in the last year, which is just enormous. And as housing prices rise here, there's like echoes throughout the state. So I think it was in Tacoma, rents increased by 19%. It's not just Seattle, but the pressure on the housing prices here then expand out to other parts of the state. And further, we have a homelessness problem, and I will give you some of the scary numbers. And these are probably not surprising to anybody who is in the city. Seattle has the third largest homeless population just in sheer numbers compared to any city in the United States. So New York, our largest city in the country, is number one. LA, our second largest city in the country, is number two. And Seattle is number three, even though we're I think the 20th largest city in the country. So proportionately, we have the largest homeless population compared to any other major city in the US. Further, HUD estimates that the Seattle area has a homelessness population of about 11,200 people. That's a 30% increase since 2010. They do conduct on an annual basis a homelessness count, and that also comes up with a fairly similar figure as to how many folks are currently homeless in our area. And further, Seattle's rate of homelessness was twice the national rate at 366 people per 100,000 residents. So, and as I mentioned, this is the highest of any major city in the country. We have a huge issue with homelessness in Seattle. Not a surprise. Anybody who's walked downtown, seen what's going on, not a surprise. So the question is, why do we have such a big problem here with homelessness? What's going on? So my first question is, do we just have more people here that are mentally ill? Because a significant portion of the homelessness population appear to have chronic mental illness. Is it just that we have more mentally ill people here? There's a little bit, there is a kernel of truth to this, in that we actually have, per capita, for whatever reason, the third highest population of mentally ill of major cities in the country. But the difference, there's not a huge difference though between Seattle and LA, or Seattle and San Francisco, or Seattle and Austin, or Seattle and Houston. Even if we're number 3, we're not that high compared to everybody else. Generally speaking, the number of people who are mentally ill are sprinkled more or less evenly around the country. So it really, to say, oh, it's because there's all these mentally ill people here, is there's a little bit of truth in this, especially when you consider that actually Washington State is the 48th, if I remember the statistic correctly, the 48th in the country in terms of providing residential services, like a psychiatric hospital or whatever, in term for it's mentally ill. So we've got a relatively high population and we don't have a lot of services. But even so, we're not drastically different from the rest of the country compared to all these other cities that don't have the same level of homelessness problem that we have. So another possibility that why we have such a big problem is, do we have more people who are addicted to drugs, is particularly heroin? Often opioid addiction is pointed to as a major reason for homelessness. And the answer to this question is no. We have far more folks that are addicted to opioids in places like Arkansas, like West Virginia. That's where we really have this epidemic of opioid addiction. And here, it's not so bad. So it isn't that we have a lot of opioid addicts. Oh no, my computer. Here we go. So another possibility, people think, the reason why we have so many homeless folks here is that we have more poverty here. There's just more poor people compared to everywhere else. And this isn't true either. You look at cities like Detroit, far higher incidence of poverty in a city like Detroit or Cleveland compared to Seattle. Actually, we have a lot of money in Seattle. This is not there's not these huge quantities of folks living in poverty here. So that's not the reasoning. So what is? I'm going to suggest to you folks that the reason why we have such a big problem with homelessness is that housing in Seattle and other coastal cities that also have a huge homelessness problem is unaffordable. When you're in a city like Detroit that has a lot of poor people and there's problems, maybe somebody does have a chronic mental illness, or they have a drug issue, or they just don't have a lot of money and a bunch of calamities fall on their heads. There is enough relatively inexpensive housing such that they can figure it out, that there's a place for them to go. They have to be in really bad straits to end up on the street. So there's a or if you are a drug addict and you're living in West Virginia, you can find a cheap place to live and maintain your drug habit, and you won't be on the streets. The reason why people like this end up on the streets is because there's no real low cost housing for them to go into. And when we look at examples of places where they say, wow, they did a great job of addressing homelessness You may have heard that Salt Lake City did a great job with their Housing First program. Part of the reason why they had success is when they brought people out of the streets, gave them support services, then they could move them right into housing that was $400 a month. We don't have in the Seattle area housing at $400 a month. So I'm going to suggest to you that the reason why we have this homelessness problem is not because we have more people who are drug addicted or more people who are suffering from chronic mental illness, or they're just simply poor, but that the resources, we just don't have housing that's affordable for them. I'm just going to throw that out there as a suggestion. So then the next question is, what are we doing about it? And I'm going to tackle this mostly from the housing perspective, not in terms of services, which is a whole nother ball of wax. I'm just going to talk about it from the housing angle, because I just suggested to you that the reason why we have a problem is we don't have enough housing. So I'm going to talk about the housing side of this equation, right? Okay. So what we're doing right now is for people who are currently living on the streets or in shelters, is we are building permanent supportive housing. And we have permanent supportive housing that is complete, that is under construction, or is in sort of development that hasn't quite gotten to the construction phase. Hundreds and hundreds of units of permanent supportive housing to tackle this problem. And part of the reason why we have so much permanent supportive housing coming down the pike is because of the high visibility of the homelessness problem. And so the pressure has gone on the politicians to fund it, and we're building it like crazy. So let's go take a look at an example of this. Hobson Place. I'm going to talk about Hobson Place 2, which is at the north end of the Rainier Valley. And this was financed through federal low-income housing tax credits, the state housing trust fund, the city of Seattle housing levy, and then it has a service dollars from a variety of sources, federal, state, and local. So this is kind of a cool project, just to give you an idea of what this is like. The first 2 floors are a clinic. The clinic is available to anybody in the community. Anybody can go there and get health care. But the people that are there are specifically trained to work with folks that are homeless, that have some of these issues that I mentioned in terms of their physical and mental health. They may be skilled at prescribing drugs when somebody is already taking recreational street drugs, because sometimes knowing about the interactions of those, it takes a little bit more pharmaceutical knowledge than working with the general population. And then above this clinic, on the floors above, is permanent supportive housing. And I believe there are, oh boy, I believe there's 4 floors. There might be 5. I hope this is not a quiz. But there's floors of the housing that are above that. And this project is run by the Downtown Emergency Service Center, which is the largest provider of housing and services for folks that are homeless in Seattle. This is a lovely project. We're very proud of it. This kind of housing is very expensive to run. And it's because the people that are in this kind of housing have such a high acuity of problems and needs such a depth of services. And also because of the issues that they bring, they're also very hard on the building itself. So we're looking at, right now, permanent supportive housing is running about, these are very rough numbers, about $15,000 per unit per year in terms of just operation. That is to keep the building in good working order, to provide security. Those aren't service dollars, that's just to maintain the building. And for a comparison, a standard apartment building is probably somewhere about a third of that, or less, fourth of that. And then on top of that, you have the service dollars, which would be another, let's say $15,000 a year per unit. So if you're talking about 40 units of permanent supportive housing, that's $1.4 million approximately in operating dollars and service dollars every year, just to keep those people safe, keep them from hurting themselves, terrorizing their neighbors, and damaging the building. It's expensive housing to operate and provide the level of service that these people need. I have some anecdotes I could tell about this sort of thing, but I'll leave it maybe to the end if people are curious about why PSH is so expensive. And all these funding sources, do I need to go? I don't know if I don't want to get too wonky. So you can unmute and tell me if I'm getting too wonky about any of like where this money comes from. But I'll go through just a little bit of what these are, so you have a little sense of it. On the federal 9% low-income housing tax credit means that it's typically a bank has purchased low-income housing tax credits for this building. And in exchange for getting those tax credits, they put cash into the building. And that's how the building gets cash to build it. And through a period of time, they get this tax benefit. And then after 15 years, typically, that for-profit partner that's taken all those tax credit typically is out of the deal. And they're gone because they've realized all the money that they can realize out of it. And they say hasta la vista. And typically, if this project's being developed with a nonprofit, then the nonprofit takes over the partnership. That's a very typical structure. State Housing Trust Fund, you're paying for through your state taxes. So that's where that money comes from. City of Seattle housing levy money. If you live in the city of Seattle and you're paying property taxes, that's where that money comes from. The housing levy will come up again. Please vote yes. There's an opinion. Okay. And then the service dollars are indeed from a variety of sources. Are the residents on Medicaid? Medicaid helps fund some of this. There's some state service dollars in this also. I think King County has some service dollars. There's a number of folks in there just to help keep the building operating on a daily basis. Okay. Does that kind of give you a picture of what PSH looks like? That's what we call it. I'll try not to use too many TLAs, 3-letter acronyms, but if I get too far in those weeds and I start using terminology you can't figure out, call me on it. Okay.
Okay.
Next, you may have heard of something called the missing middle when it comes to housing. I believe that the true missing middle in the affordable housing sphere is people that have some income, just not a lot. So they're not homeless and they do make some money, just they don't make a lot of money. When I was the director of the Wallingford Community Senior Center, a lot of these folks were using the senior center. They're seniors with a Social Security, maybe SSI, maybe a small pension, or they are low-wage workers. Like they're working fast food. They've got a couple kids. The fast food restaurant won't give them full-time employment because then they'd have to pay benefits. So they work, 30 hours a week at minimum wage. They are making money. They just aren't making lots and lots of money. So give you an idea of folks that are in this kind of situation. I'm using the level of 30% of local area median income. So if you think about all the people that live in Seattle, and think about what the average is, that's 100% of median income. These are people at 30% median income. So they're making 1/3 of what the average person makes in Seattle. So this would be people making less than $40,000 a year, approximately, for a household of one, a household of two, less than $46,000 a year.
Wow.
Where do they go? How do they pay rent? I was looking at, yes, it's a real problem.
Wow.
Okay. Up. Oh no, I went too far.
There you go.
Okay, here we go. So what we do right now for folks in this situation is there's a program called Section 8. And I know when I say Section 8, people often think of Corporal Klinger and how he was going to get out of the army under a Section 8 clause. This is not what I'm talking about, okay? So when I say Section 8, don't think of Corporal Klinger. If you qualify for Section 8 housing, you pay 30% of your income in rent, no matter what your income is. And there are buildings that are all 100% Section 8 buildings. Those are usually owned by a housing authority. So like the Seattle Housing Authority has buildings that are 100% Section 8 buildings. So everybody there, no matter who they are, they're paying 30% of their income in rent. There's also something called a Section 8 certificate that goes to an individual. So if you have a Section 8 certificate, you can go anywhere you want to in the city, in the county, in the state with your certificate. And you just have to find a building that will accept it. And then HUD will pay for the difference between 30% of your income and rent and what the rent is, fair market rent for that area is. Section 8, there's a huge need for it. Of the, let's see if I want to get the stat right. Only 20% of the people who could qualify for Section 8 have it. The remaining 80% of folks that would qualify for a Section 8 certificate can't get it. So this is not like, let's say, food stamps. Everybody who qualifies for food stamps gets food stamps. Everybody over the age of 65 gets Medicare. These are things you just get no matter who you are. With Section 8, there is typically a long waiting list, or the waiting list is so long they just decided to close it because it's so ridiculously long. At the senior center, if we had anybody who was renting, we would tell people, get in line now. It doesn't matter, you're happy where you're living and what your circumstances are. Get on a waiting list now, because you might need it if 15 years from now. And if you need it 15 years from now and you get on the waiting list, you'll be dead by the time you get the certificate. So don't wait. Do that now. That was just our message on that one. Okay. So for people that are at 50 and 60% workforce housing, we are doing a lot in this area. And just again, to kind of give you an idea what I'm talking about when I say workforce housing, this is for people who have incomes that are, and here's some examples for Seattle, less than 48,600 for a single person. And what they're going to be paying for typically for a 1-bedroom is about $1,000 or so a month under that income. And then just thinking about what it would look like for a larger household of 4, then that household of 4 would be making less than about $70,000. And then the rent would be about $1,800. Yes.
Now, are you saying that they would be paying $1,800 a month
3-bedroom apartment. Yeah, if you're thinking about a house, like a household of 4, mom, dad, a couple kids, they've got a 3-bedroom apartment, maybe 1 bedroom for mom and dad, 1 for the son and 1 for the daughter. That's going to be $1,800 a month.
But that's not what they're paying under HUD.
This has nothing to do with HUD.
Oh,
We've left the world of HUD. We're now talking about workforce housing. We're done with Section 8. I'm now on a new slide. This is what they're paying per month out of their pockets.
Okay. So this is without help.
This is for projects that have been specifically financed to provide workforce housing. And I'll go through like how these things are financed. These aren't, again, there's no HUD. There's typically no HUD money in these. These are done through other sources.
Wow.
So that is this. And, you know, when we talk about folks that are less than $48,000, this might be a social worker at a local nonprofit, or a beginning teacher. Maybe these are folks that are professionals. They just are in fields that aren't paid as well, typically. They've got a little bit more money than the folks that I talked about in the missing middle. So let's take a look at an example of what this kind of housing looks like. And there's another example. So this is the Liberty Bank building in the Central District. And this was done as a partnership between Community Roots Housing and Africa Town. Africa Town is a organization that represents the historic Black population of the central area. Community Roots Housing does a lot of housing development, owns a lot of housing in the central part of Seattle, whether that's Capitol Hill, CD, Belltown. You know, they have a lot of projects in the central part of the city. This project was financed using tax exempt bonds, and they come along with a 4% low-income housing tax credit. So remember when I talked about the permanent supportive housing, that was a 9% tax credit. This is a 4% tax credit. So it comes with less cash, but it does come with some cash. So there's an investor in this project that's getting those tax credits and put cash into this project so it could function. And the tax exempt bonds that are in it lower the interest rate a little. So Community Roots and Africa Town are paying back money on a bond. It's like a loan, basically. It's like a tax exempt loan. It has a little bit lower of an interest rate. That's why they're serving people at these higher incomes than you saw when I was talking about Section 8, because they have to pay the money back to a bank because there's a loan here. It also got money from the State Housing Trust Fund and money from the City of Seattle Housing Levy. So this is kind of like for standard workforce housing. It does have a level of subsidy. It has a subsidy through the bonds and the tax credits, through the State Housing Trust Fund, through the City of Seattle Housing Levy. And it's serving people at a maximum income of, I believe it is $50,000, which is fairly similar to that slide I showed you just once before. People that would be maxing out at those incomes. That kind of makes sense?
Yep.
Okay. Let's go take a look. Yeah?
How many of us are left?
Are left in what? In this presentation?
I was just wondering how many of us were still on. Okay.
I have no idea, man. I'm just talking. I could be talking to myself for all I know. I have no idea.
We're here. We're just muted.
I'll believe you. There could be a vast audience. I have no idea. I'm looking at the slide. I'm not looking at you guys. So
Claire.
Yes.
I have a question about the family of 4 that
let's go back.
Yeah, that has under $70,000. So my question is, out of their $70,000 that they make per year, they would have to pay a max of $1,804 for a 3-bedroom. And then the difference, because a 3-bedroom is not necessarily gonna be $1,804. So does that mean that they have to
That's what they pay. No, that's what they pay.
And this is in the workforce housing that is provided for them.
Yes, this is, we
Okay.
consider this to be workforce housing.
Okay, all right, that's what I didn't.
Folks that make $70,000 a year, maybe it's, you know, one, maybe it's a two-parent family and one person is making $50,000, the other one has a part-time income and making, you know, the difference. They have a couple kids. And this would be the maximum rent charged.
And then my other question about workforce housing is that also got a waiting list of so long,
No,
it's ridiculous?
No,
Oh,
no, it's
okay.
actually, if you, I mean, it varies around town, but if you said, and I used to, when I used to be on the Seattle Reddit, you know, there'd be some poor individual who would say, help, I need to find an apartment at $1,000 a month and I look at, you know, and I'd say, hey, you know, you can go to, let's say, the Community Roots website, take a look and see if any of those, you know, if you qualify under the income side and if any of those buildings are appealing to you.
Mhm.
And there is a site called apartmentfinder.org, which stands for, it's APT FINDER. Apartment is shortened to APT, finder.org. If you go there, that's for the entire state. And it will tell you like, and you can put in things like, I want a seniors only building and 50% median income in King County. And I want one that has immediate availability,
Mhm,
maybe.
mhm.
And it will give you a list of every apartment that has immediate availability, is at your income level, and is in King County.
Okay.
Or you could say, I only want to look at places in 98102. And maybe you'll get 0 projects, but you know, that's, you could say Washington State too, and find out that there's a project in Ritzville that'll take you today. You know, I don't know.
Mhm.
But there is, because this housing turns over a fair bit too, it's, you know, there's vacancies around.
Okay.
It isn't like the Section 8 program, which is so overburdened and the waiting lists are forever. Because this is paying a lot more money.
Mhm.
You know, if you are only making $30,000 a year, for you to pay $1,000 a month is a lot of money. We're finding
Yeah.
that, you know, you're going to be paying, you know, maybe half of your income for your rent. So yeah, it's not as this sort of thing is not so oversubscribed for the potential tenants. Okay, I'm just going to push us along. I'm going to argue with you. This is where I'm going to make an opinion that subsidized housing is not enough. I've just given you some examples of subsidized housing. Permanent supportive housing for the homeless, Section 8 type housing that you're going to get out of the housing authority, and these kinds of workforce projects that are very typically financed out of my work group at the Washington State Housing Finance Commission. We don't have the resources to be able to meet the needs in Seattle, in King County, and in Washington State. We simply don't. We started out at the beginning of this year. Well, actually, we made people put in a pre-application back in December, so not quite the beginning. It's actually the end of last year. We said, we have $200 million worth of resources. Please tell us if you're planning to apply in March. So we had them do like a pre-application process. We called it an intent to apply. All they had to do is say, give us the possible name of the building, where it was going to be located, how much money they wanted. I mean, some very vague information, but it's something that showed that they had thought about it a little bit and said, you know, are you planning to apply in March? And we received almost $1 billion in requests through that pre-application process. So we have developers out there that would like to be able to build, but we don't have the resources to be able to finance it to meet the needs of our area. So this can't just be done through state. I'm going to argue that it can't just be done through state, city, and federal resources. I'm going to argue with you that we need to upzone in Seattle. Now you can hate me now, but because I know this is not necessarily a popular thing to say, but absolutely, I believe that if we are going to take care of the rest of our housing needs in the city of Seattle, we need to have a higher supply of housing. We only have so much land. We've got a lot of hills and water. So it's got to be sandwiched somewhere in our existing city. And it means that we're going to have greater density. So let me go ahead and give you my next one. I'm going to suggest to you that I am an example of one of your potential scary new neighbors if you upsell. I live in 2020 Broadway, which is this lovely house that you see in the slide. This in our nice Capitol Hill neighborhood, I think looks mostly like just a big house. I don't think that we're a blight on the character of our neighborhood. It is, but it contains 4 units of housing. And right next to us is another house that looks a little bit different. Also looks like just a big house, also contains 4 units of housing. The reason why we were able to have these units here is because they were grandfathered in before Seattle locked itself into being so much of a single family zoned neighborhood. But we are able to live in a neighborhood. I'm able to live in a neighborhood that I otherwise could not afford because I have an apartment here at 2020 Broadway. I have been told by other people that they don't like people to live in things like duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes like this because, I don't know, the people are loud and they're undesirable or something like that. And I think, well, I'm not that loud. I hope I'm not that undesirable. I'm one of those people that is crammed into a single family neighborhood in my quadruplex. So yes, okay. And also one of the arguments that is often made for not upzoning is a neighborhood has a character, and if we allow upzoning, it will ruin the character. And this is a nice picture of a house that could be very easily in Ballard, and you would think, oh, look at this lovely house and it contributes to the character of the neighborhood. But at the time it was actually first built, it was a kit from Sears and was built by the homeowner. And at the time, this was considered to be, low class housing that undesirable people probably, they didn't want those people living in their neighborhood. And now it's considered to be part of the neighborhood character. So even if we may feel resistant about some of the potentiality of having some of these smaller apartment buildings being, not in character with the neighborhood, perhaps they will over time contribute to the character. That's opinion again. This is the entirety of my presentation. I don't know how long I blathered for. So I'm going to stop sharing because we're now to questions and comments. God, I talked for 40 minutes. Oh, you guys are so tolerant. Who knew? Who knew? So I've given you just a little view, some snapshots of different kinds of housing that is subsidized in the city. I kind of made the suggestion that we needed to build more, have more housing, and I gave you some ways that we're doing it and ways we can continue to do it. And I'm now here to answer your questions and welcome your comments, whether you agree with my opinions or don't agree with my opinions or other related things. So I'm going to do my best. Okay.
So I have a question.
Sure, Carol.
Well, I have a question about the tiny houses.
Oh God, tiny houses.
Yeah.
What about tiny houses? There's a bunch of thoughts I have about tiny houses. They are always going to be a temporary thing. Are they better than a tent? Yeah, maybe. So, and are they a lot cheaper than an apartment building? Yeah, I mean, maybe. But ideally what we're doing is helping people get into permanent housing.
Mhm.
And so it's it's like, you can spend money on something that's temporary because it's better than nothing.
Mhm.
But so you often don't see a lot of when you talk to like people in the housing development professional world, they're usually not all that keen on tiny homes. Lehigh, the Low Income Housing Institute, is a nonprofit in Seattle that is probably the only one that's really doing a lot of tiny homes and managing them. They're okay. Again, it's like compared to, I mean, I just saw somebody on Sunday when I was riding my bike up in Kenmore, sleeping in a bus shelter, and half of the sleeping bag was, hanging outside of the bus shelter, and it was raining really hard. And I was thinking, well, that sucks. I wouldn't want to be him. His sleeping bag is going to be soaked. Would he be better off in a tiny house? Probably.
So the other question I have is totally on a different subject, but
Absolutely.
funding. So are the corporations, for instance, Amazon, didn't they contribute?
Yes. Oh, yes. Amazon, Microsoft. I think this
Oh.
actually points to the reality that these corporations are doing this not out of their philanthropy departments. I'll just say that.
Here,
They're
let's go.
doing it out of
In the
their
house.
corporate departments. Their corporate investment departments. So it's clearly they see the need for affordable housing to be in their financial interest. And yes, they are putting in
Go.
money,
No.
and we have a great partnership with Microsoft. Amazon is a little bit more of a pain in the hiney no. Amazon also is putting in money. And so when they put in money, they're putting in money very much for workforce housing within kind of the zone of where their workers are working, which makes sense. I mean, this is going to be what they're going to do because they need to support. Amazon needs warehouse workers. Microsoft needs people not just to code, but to do things like mow the lawns in front of their beautiful buildings and cook the food for the coders to eat. So they're going to be, supporting this kind of housing, and they show interest in some of it. So, for example, we're doing a lot of partnerships with developers and specifically Sound Transit, and putting in transit-oriented development as we are building out the light rail system, right? So you think about Angle Lake, Des Moines, there's going to be a station there, and then looking to the east side, there's going to be a station in the Spring District, and another one, in downtown Redmond. And as those projects are going up, and we're trying to maximize affordability, we're welcoming like that Microsoft and Amazon money into those projects so that we can achieve indeed those higher levels of affordability. So yes, they're putting money in. We have a partnership with the Seattle Foundation, and the Seattle Foundation is like for some of the smaller companies that aren't quite as big as an Amazon or a Microsoft that still want to contribute money to this. There's something called the Evergreen Fund. So if you are a smaller company, which is still a fairly large corporation by my standards, you can put money into the Evergreen Fund. And then that is also being used to help with some of these projects as well. Yes, Jeannie.
Well, first of
Yes,
all,
you're no longer on your porch, are you?
no,
You're
I'm
in
no
your
longer
living room.
outside. I'm now in my living room. Yes, it got dark, and hopefully my dog will keep quiet. That was another problem I was having.
Oh, yeah, sure.
The first thing that hit me was, oh my God, that I have two sons. One lives in LA and one lives in Ballard. No wonder there's
And those are places
yeah.
that have real homelessness problems, aren't they?
Yes,
Yes.
yes. I was just thinking about the tiny houses. Wouldn't
Oh,
that
God.
require a lot more space? I mean, tiny
Yes, this
houses.
is another issue, is that tiny houses do require more space, and we're talking about where land is particularly expensive. So, you know, maybe tiny houses make more sense in, I don't know, Yakima, where land prices are a little bit lower than it would be here, potentially.
Yeah.
I mean,
So how?
yeah.
Yeah. No, I was switching gears on you. I'm sorry. I do that all the time. So how long do people stay in these houses? In this housing, like I would figure that a lot of times people lose these low income jobs and stuff, and then they have to move out and they become homeless again.
Well, this is that's why I worry personally. I worry most about what I call the missing middle. Those that are really low income folks can't get a Section 8 certificate. Where do those people live? What are the rents they're paying? How rent burdened are they? It's a huge, I personally, I think I'm beginning to wonder about some of the really high acuity people that we're serving in permanent supportive housing, and really should those people be in more institutional settings, and maybe some of the money that we're spending on PSH, on permanent supportive housing, go into just general low income housing for people at these lower incomes but aren't necessarily homeless, and we can call it homelessness prevention or something, because it's a real concern that
Well, we have at the end of our street, we're in a rural area. This is a rural town, about 10,000 people. But at the end of my street, there is HUD housing. There is single level, it's a single level, and it's pretty stable.
Yeah.
I've seen the same people walking up and down the street, and it's very quiet, and they take care of their apartments, and they're good neighbors. And but I know that we have a homeless issue here too. So, but just blows my mind. My kids who are well paid are in Seattle. They've got one of those little bungalow things you showed.
Yeah, that I showed there. Yeah.
One of those.
Well, how much did it cost them? I bet you it cost them like $800,000, $850,000 or something.
Well, they bought it for. I remember we all, shook our heads and went, "Oh my God!" They bought it probably almost 20 years ago.
Oh,
and
they didn't spend that.
Over 300 for it.
Yeah.
But they would like to move, but it's like, ain't gonna happen. Yes, those are selling somewhere in the area of between 8 and 9, and then people come in and renovate them on top of that.
Yep.
So it's kind of like, you guys, you just got to figure this out and just stay where you are. But yeah, it's scary.
So it's really difficult. There was a BALI member who was living in a house. She was somebody who worked for a nonprofit back when you could buy a house in the 90s and be somebody who worked for a nonprofit.
Yeah.
And she bought her house in the Finney Ridge area, and as time went on, was able to keep it kind of going and pay her mortgage by renting out rooms and and sharing her housing with other people. But she was like, I could never. How could I ever sell this place? Because where would I go? Even if it's worth so much more now.
Right.
She solved that problem. I just want to say she'd been single her whole life and found the love of her life at age 68. And married him, and he already had a house. And so I think that she sold that place in Finney Ridge, and that's her retirement. Not all of us are so lucky in terms of
So Claire, I have another question. When you talk about up zoning or whatever, up building.
Yeah, up zoning.
So I was upset when the light rail started, and they have these stations.
Right.
There's nothing on top of them. There's no services below them. Now below is expensive because you got to dig. But Europe, you have a train station
And you have all the stuff around.
you have everything around it so that it's very efficient. And I was like, why are we reinventing the wheel? Why doesn't every station have a huge number of apartment houses and stuff on top of it? And it's probably money or whatever. I don't know what it is, but why aren't we considering uploading or upscaling or whatever you call it?
Yes.
In those.
Why aren't we having greater density around stations?
Yeah.
I think that, some of these projects that I just mentioned are coming down the pipe. They built the station. Now, the land that is in the general area is then coming online to be used for housing. Like, for example, if you think about the station that's on 65th, the Roosevelt station, I just took a tour of Cedar Crossing, which we financed, which is adjacent to it. It is, say, 7 stories. It's got a daycare on the main floor, and then it has things like restaurants. They actually, when they built it, they were smart enough to already put the ventilation, because restaurants need like hoods over the stoves, and they put that in. They didn't, so that the restaurant doesn't need to retrofit. So they got restaurants right away. He said, yep, we're moving in. And then you have all that housing associated with it it's mostly at 50 and 60% median income, with a few, I know they have a few units that they have in coordination with Children's Hospital for families that their kids have cancer or some other disease, and being treated at Children's, and so that they've got, those are especially subsidized with Children's Hospital. So I think that we'll see more. I don't think you're going to see necessarily high-rise development, because high-rise has a whole bunch of other stuff associated with it, but you'll see what we call in the business, 4-on-2 or 5-on-2 or 5-on-1. The idea is that you might have a ground floor of retail, like you mentioned, maybe a garage underneath or something under there, because people like to park. This is the United States of America, so it might not be, it's certainly not enough parking spaces for everybody above, but there's some parking down there. And then you've got another on that podium, on that concrete podium, then you've got all those floors above it. And you can't go higher than 8 really in the city of Seattle, 8 stories with that kind of a development. If you look at Othello Station, there is a project right next to Othello Station. Lehigh developed it, and it is 6-on-2.
Okay.
So it's going to come. It just takes, by the time you line up all the money, and then you get all your permits, and then you start building it, it's probably 2 to 3 years to put the money together and the permits together, another 2 years to build it, and then you've got it. So
Yeah,
it takes a while.
I was thinking that was one of the things I was thinking, is that it takes so long to do some of this. And then the other thing is, you said there were 11,000 plus homeless people, and you're talking about a drop in the bucket with these housing projects. So you have 40 apartments in one building, and and in another.
I know, that's what we got to do. We got to do everything. That's why I think we need to do the upzoning. We need to be, and it's very frustrating. If we could have gotten buy build back better, or whatever that thing was that didn't get passed. If that had passed through Congress, then we would have had double the resources in Washington State to do this kind of housing.
But when you have something like this, and I tend to just jump in, and
go ahead, Jean.
I wish I didn't do that, but I do it. But anyway, what I was thinking is, do they have streamlined, building codes and building processes?
Yes.
Because otherwise they can get so bogged down.
At my fourplex that you got to see lovely picture of, we've been bogged down with DCI, that's the Department of Construction and Inspections.
Right.
You don't want to hear my sad story. So yes, for affordable projects that have this kind of money from the Office of Housing or from Washington, the Housing Trust Fund, they get a streamlined procedure for their
Okay.
permits. It still takes a while.
It would be a very frustrating job to be doing, I think.
You know,
God almighty.
I was talking to some folks, this is a few years back in New York City, and they had in their pro forma, which gives, you know, like all the money that they spend and where all the uses come from. What's this line item called expediter? Because we don't have expediters here. Apparently an expediter in your New York City development pays the bribes.
Oh.
Here, we're squeaky clean here in the Pacific Northwest, and we don't have expediters.
No.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Even with the upbuilding and all that,
Yeah.
I have a friend, a dear friend, who lives in a room with her daughter and son-in-law because she could not get any subsidized housing. I'm concerned about the middle people who are good people who worked all their lives now on Social Security. Even with building more units, is it going to be affordable?
Yeah, you know, so you know, being my little capitalist side of me, I'm not entirely waving a red flag here, is if we have greater supply, it'll lower the prices, no matter what. Because there are people that would, you know, that are maybe we just need a greater supply. Yes, but I agree, you know, the story that you just told about your friend, I know all these kinds of stories having been at the senior center. Somebody who's 85, who's couch surfing. Like, do you want to couch surf at age 85? I wouldn't want to be. And often we would have, not a lot, but we would have one or two members of the senior center that look like your archetypal little old ladies. They look like you guys. I just want to say. And you know, so they don't look homeless, right? They don't look, none of you look homeless, you know.
Right.
They would come into the senior center and they would have their cup of coffee and they would play bridge or whatever. And they slept in the gazebo outside the senior center.
Oh my.
Or they were trying to, we give them a bus pass, they go out to the airport, and they'd snooze in the airport.
Wow.
To my mind, this is a travesty. People talk about, oh, society is going to collapse in a few years. I feel like if we have people, as you say, who have worked their whole lives, or they were a mom their whole life, I
Right.
don't care. And this is how we treat folks, as we say, oh, golly gee, sucks to be you, you know, there was a woman I remember who her whole life, you know, she had devoted her life to her kids, her husband got some awful disease, so that just drained the family coffers. So she had no money. He finally dies. And now she realizes, who's going to take care of me?
Yeah.
Who,
Right.
you know, where, and she had no financial resources whatsoever. It's like,
Yeah.
so I don't have answers for this sort of thing. You can, you know, that's why we tell people at the senior center, get on these lists early. Sometimes you can use apartmentfinder.org and you can find maybe a project someplace that will work for you. The rents are lower. You know, if your income is the same no matter where you are, and you're able and willing to move, you can move to other parts of the state sometimes. I know somebody who did this, who was in the Seattle area, moved to Eastern Washington to achieve a lower rent because, you know, he had a fixed income, and he lived in Pullman, you know, it's a college town, and it was cheaper.
Yeah.
Not everybody wants to do that because you've got your friends here, maybe you've got your family here, you've got your supports here, you know, that lady at Bartell's, you know, that you've been to. And also we saw things also at the senior center, very similar, you know, I can tell you, I'll tell you only one more story on this because, you know, the building she had been in for, it was at least 20 years. The building she'd been in They were going to tear it down and put something else on it. They very kindly gave her 6 months notice that this was going to happen. She had lived there for so long. She spent 5 of maybe those 6 months saying, I can't believe it. It's not really going to happen. She was just in total
Yeah.
denial. And then by the time she realized, oh my God, I have to move out in a month. By the time she went to our social worker at the senior center, it's like,
Yeah,
well, put all your possessions in a, sure guard storage area. And let's see how we can, do you have friends? Again, it's that couch surfing. Do you have a friend that you can stay with for a while we try to figure this out?
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I don't have answers.
so if there's not
Okay.
enough, so the Build Back Better bill didn't get passed. So where is a source of funding going to come from if the government is not stepping in? I mean, where do we get these?
What do
funds
we
from?
do? Right. What do we do?
Yeah.
I urge you to vote for if you live in the city of Seattle, to vote for the housing levy, because that helps a lot of this stuff go.
Mhm.
Our state legislature put a lot of money into housing. I'm not necessarily in agreement exactly where they put it. They put a lot of money into rapid acquisition, which would have been great 2 years ago when the pandemic started and we had projects that needed to be rapidly acquired. Now it's not clear to me where those great rapid acquisition projects are, but there is state money for that. And in general, the state has stepped up because the feds haven't. And there is rumors that at least not the entirety of Buy Back Better, but some of this housing related legislation may yet be stuffed in some other bill that will get passed by the end of the year. And it might be retrospective to 2022.
Mhm.
I have another question about living in these facilities. So let's say you get somebody into one of those, like that one you showed us, the
Hobson,
first one.
yeah, Hobson Place, yeah.
Yeah. So how do you keep those apartments decent?
Oh
I mean,
God, this is a great question. And it was Monday, I was down in Vancouver, Washington, and I did a great tour of a project that they just built, permanent supportive housing in Vancouver. And so there's things, that they have. For example, there's a drain in the floor of the bathroom, and they can shut off the water from the outside, the staff can, as well as from the inside, so that nobody can flood their unit.
Mm.
The bed is metal that is provided. The finishings, like on the mantle, is some indestructible material. It borders on institutional feeling, but it kind of has to. I mean, this is, again, and they also have a decontamination room. So if you want to bring in a dresser from someplace else, it goes in the decon room because we don't want to have bed bugs. No. So it goes in the decon room and they heat it up. But again, because we're the way that the coordinated entry system works in Seattle, at least, the people who are judged to be the most vulnerable get housing first.